Welcome to Wednesday on the Vince Coglianese Show. It is the second hour of the program. Mike Opelka sitting in for Vince. If you just got back from the International Space Station, Vince is under the weather but on the mend. He had a little surgery on his throat but is expected to be back 100%. And I'm sure he's wearing a hole in the carpeting, pacing at home, trying to get his healing done quicker. But I'll be here trying to take care of business in the interim, and you're welcome to continue praying for Vince's recovery. But he's on the mend. He's going to be back soon, just not today. We're trying to get to everything today. So many things on the agenda today. Coming up this hour, Brianna Lyman from the Federalist. She is their elections correspondent. We're going to talk, since we are 152 days and change away from the most important election in our country's history. I kid you not. The most important election in our nation's history. There is some follow-up to yesterday's executive order from Joe Biden on the border, and some of it I think is really interesting. Some of it from a guy who knows what the problem is at the border. Texas Governor Greg Abbott. We will get to Governor Abbott's statements because he's a guy who's seen it firsthand. We'll talk about Kamala Harris and what she said last night on the Jimmy Kimmel live show, which is funny because it's not live. They tape it well ahead of time. So maybe we should get them on whether or not they're telling the truth. We also have some crazy statements from Biden advisor Tom Perez. You're going to hear the word salad. I think he found Kamala's stash as well. And we'll also get some more madness out of Alejandro Mayorkas. You know, we should really change his title. He's not just the Biden DHS secretary. He should be formally and officially known as impeached Biden DHS secretary, because now the Democrats have been told that every time they mention Joe Biden's name, they have to say convicted felon. That's from the guidance, reportedly from the guidance of George Soros's kid, Alex, the heir to the Soros empire. But there is breaking news after yesterday's frustrating hearing with Merrick Garland and all the months and months and months where we have heard James Comey say that we're going to get the Bidens and the Biden crime family. We've got the receipts. We have Byron Donalds telling us, as his perspective as a former banking executive, that what he's seeing with all these accounts, these shell companies, it is a key indicator of a criminal enterprise. And it seems like nothing was ever going to happen, right? It really felt frustrating that, my God, what is it going to take? Well, not long before the program started today, House Republicans actually referred two members of the Biden crime family, Hunter Biden and brother James Biden. So Joe's son, Hunter, and his brother James, for criminal prosecution. Criminal prosecution. Now, will that happen? I wonder. The allegations are that they lied while testifying as part of the inquiry into Joe for the impeachment. So a letter went out to AG Merrick Garland and special counsel David Weiss recommending that both of the Biden family members be charged with making false statements. And Hunter should also get charged with perjury. You think that's probably going to happen before the sun goes down today, right? Come on. Seriously. Will it? I don't know. We will see. We know the money was there, millions and millions of dollars made by the Biden family members and their companies. And we still don't know what those companies do, what the product was, other than the Biden family name. So whether or not what happened with the interview with James Biden on February 21st of this year, or the Hunter February 28th deposition, both men testified under oath, which means if there are provable lies, that there should be provable crimes. Will they be charged? I don't have a lot of faith that they will be charged. Hunter's attorney, the very expensive Abby Lowell, said, "Here we go again, grasping at straws and twisting Hunter's testimony to try and revive an impeachment inquiry. That was a complete and utter failure." Now, here's where it kind of gets interesting. CNN. This happened on CNN. It's kind of astounding. CNN and Jake Tapper had a moment of clarity about this issue. And I really think this is kind of fascinating when you listen to this and you think, wait a minute, did this really happen, or was this some sort of AI? No, this actually happened on CNN.
And Kristen, Glenn Kessler from the Washington Post had a fact check about Joe Biden from earlier this month, noting that Hunter Biden admitted in court in July that he was in fact paid substantial sums from Chinese companies. Kessler wrote, Hunter Biden reported nearly $2.4 million in income in 2017 and $2.2 million in income in 2018, most of which came from Chinese or Ukrainian interests. But this directly goes against what Joe Biden said in the debate in 2020 with Donald Trump. Take a listen.
My son has not made money in terms of this thing about what are you talking about? China.
What you
None of that is true.
He made a fortune in Ukraine, in China, in Moscow,
that is simply
and various
not
other places.
True.
So it's from two different debates, but I mean, Trump was right. I mean, he did make a fortune from China, and Joe Biden was wrong. I don't know that he was lying about it. He might not have been told by Hunter, but this blind spot is a problem.
Now, I find it interesting that that actually was allowed to get through the CNN filters. He still couldn't say that Joe Biden lied. He gave him plausible deniability to say that maybe Joe didn't know. Maybe Joe had no idea. Right. Joe had no idea. Seriously? Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Well, I wonder if we should do a poll on this. If anybody thinks there will be charges forthcoming for James Biden and for Hunter Biden, and if so, does this mean Joe's going to have to step aside? Will those charges, if they are issued, be part of this growing gravity to force Joe Biden to possibly step aside? Not just because of the Wall Street Journal article we referenced in the first hour of the show that talks about how Joe Biden is, I believe the term they used is slipping. Behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. You've got that article. You have the currently the trial of Hunter, the first trial of Hunter that's going on in Wilmington, which I think he's not going to get convicted of anything, even though everybody knows he's guilty of sin. But it's the home court advantage. But then you have this issue. If Joe's brother and his son get charged criminally, well, there has to be some sort of reaction from the White House. Because Joe has been saying it for a long, long time. He's done nothing. He said it as recent as this week. He did say it recently this week that my son has done nothing wrong. The other thing I wish, because I've been reading all the reports on not just Hunter Biden going into court, but the family going into court, Jill Biden showing up. Of course, she's the first lady. And then Ashley Biden going into court. And we keep calling them the first son or the first daughter. I thought we'd just give that title to the wife. Can't we just call them the president's kids? His Joe Biden's son. This first son, first daughter thing. It just seems kind of silly to me. It seems like a little giant waste of time. But anyway, I digress. The other story that was a surprise is I'm starting to see some things come out from the laptop now that the laptop is official. And as I said earlier, there's a great piece from Miranda Devine in today's edition of the New York Post. I'm trying to look what page it's on. It's on page 4, so it's right up in the front. Damning laptop is poetic justice. The laptop, which is now completely 100% verified, and everybody who was involved in the push to minimize the laptop, to hurt the credibility of anybody who claimed that it was real, should be liable in some way, shape, or form. But the silver MacBook Pro 13 covered in clear plastic wrapper, and now it is 100% verified as legitimate. And Miranda Devine, in her book, The Laptop from Hell, deserves a whole lot of support on this. 3 years and 8 months it took. Think about that. 3 years ago, 3 years and 8 months, almost 4 years, that this laptop was known to be real by the people who had their hands on it. And the left side of the mainstream media, a giant chunk of our media, said, no, we're not going to support this. And the 51 names who signed that letter saying it's likely Russian disinformation. Every one of them should have to pay some sort of reputational price for this. I don't know if anyone will ever put a monetary price on it, but the reputations of the people who were smeared and the people who were dragged through the mud on television, not just on the news channels, but on the late nights. And we should talk about Jimmy Kimmel last night with Kamala Harris, because Kamala gave us a little civics lesson last night. She was out there like, I don't have time to play the clips right now. But just the amazing part of this laptop and how much destruction the media was allowed to force on the people involved. The reputational destruction, and to John Paul Mac Isaac, the guy he ran this little bitty computer repair store just a few miles from where I live. I've even been in there. Well, it's not there anymore. The guy was forced to shut down his business and leave the state to move his family out of state to avoid the death threats because he was said to have created this whole thing. No. All he did was his job. So we'll see. Will there be any charges filed for Joe Biden? I'm sorry, for James Biden. That was a Freudian slip if I've ever heard one, right? For James Biden and for Hunter Biden, as it relates to them not telling the truth on their testimony to Congress earlier this year. Their behind closed doors testimony. The paperwork has been filed, sent over to the DOJ. Will Merrick Garland have the pelotas, the cojones, to file charges? I seriously doubt it. I have so many more things I want to get to today. As I said, Kamala Harris was on with Jimmy Kimmel, and we're, of course, going to talk with Brianna Lyman. And next hour, Jason Miyares is going to join us, the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm very excited about this nullification of the latching on to California, just blindly following whatever California does. It's just not right, and it's not okay. It's Mike Opelka at 424 on this Wednesday afternoon. Yesterday, we spent considerable time talking about the president's executive order and how it was not going to effectively close the border like we were told. You know, we were promised, well, he's going to fix it. He's going to get things done. He doesn't know what he's doing. Let's face it. This is just paperwork. And there were some great clips from Ted Cruz. We might have to get to those. But I do think that Texas Governor Abbott really understands the border from a hands-on, standing there. Well, he's not standing there. He's in a wheelchair. But he was on the border. He's been at the border several times. He's seen it front and center. He's also enacted some pretty creative ways to block the people coming across the border. And as such, the infiltration of Texas is down some 75%, and they've all moved over to California because it's too hard to get into Texas. Governor Abbott earlier this afternoon was on Fox News explaining what Biden's border executive order does, or more importantly, doesn't do.
To be clear, what this executive order does not in any way address the border crisis he created and will in no way reduce illegal immigration into the United States. To the contrary, what this order does is actually attract more people to cross the border illegally to try to be a part of that asylum process. So this actually hurts. It doesn't help the illegal immigration situation in the United States. So there is no credit that goes to Joe Biden for this, only condemnation for his reckless open border policies that are now going to be worse than before. Last thing about it, as was reported, when the policy officially went into effect last night, there was nothing stopping people from crossing the border illegally. Those images get back to the cartels. They get back to the people trying to cross the border illegally. They know it is open season to cross our border.
Open season, just in time for the election. So I don't expect the border to get any better at all. I don't expect any improvements in the border situation. And in fact, it's probably going to get, as the governor said, probably going to get worse and worse and worse, which should help Donald Trump, should help anyone running on a strong border policy. And I go back to, I quoted this yesterday, and I got an email from somebody who said, you guys are always talking about the border, and you're saying this Jay Johnson said it was a crisis if 1,000 people cross the border. I said, oh, really? You've never heard that? So you know who you are who sent me that note. I have a couple liberal friends, in case you missed it.
My staff will tell you if it was under 1,000 apprehensions the day before, that was a relatively good number. And if it was above 1,000, it was a relatively bad number, and I was going to be in a bad mood the whole day. I know that 1,000 overwhelms the system. I cannot begin to imagine what 4,000 a day looks like. So we are truly in a crisis.
Yes, we're in a crisis. We've been in a crisis of Biden's making, and he thinks what he has done, which really puts the limit on the border much higher than that 1,000 number. And depending on who you talk to, it could be either 1,000 or it could be 4,000 or more. And when we talked to Jenny Terra from the New York Post yesterday, she was saying that the real tragedy here is it's going to inspire more children being trafficked into the country by the cartels. And that will bring more money to the cartels. The amount of money they received just during the last couple of years under this Biden policy is staggering. It's in the tens of billions of dollars. Mike Opelka in for Vince Coglianese on the Vince Coglianese Show on WMAL. It is 4:34 on this Wednesday, a stormy day. You wonder if it's stormy for Hunter Biden in the Delaware courtroom where his ex-wife, girlfriend, all testifying, sharing lurid details. The laptop is now evidence, some of the images being exposed. I have questions about that Malia Obama ATM card that I saw online, a picture of that with what appears to be some white powdery substance in little lines that you would set up if you were going to somehow ingest them. Questions yet to be answered, and we'll get to that. Much more to get to today, but we have a really important topic that I think you're going to be interested in hearing about. Brianna Lyman is joining us from the Federalist, elections correspondent. In just the past week, there has been a staggering amount of money raised by the campaign to reelect Donald Trump, the campaign for Donald Trump. And it is stunning. I know the small donations that crashed the WinRed website and some of the bigger donations have made news. And when you look at that, your mind starts wandering and you start asking questions. But I love the question that Brianna asks is, where is this going to be spent? So let's get into it. Brianna Lyman, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. You have great stuff on Twitter X, and people should follow you. You break this down, and I find it fascinating to see that, more than $50 million in 24 hours after the conviction. And the following statement, it means nothing if it's not spent to turn out voters. Is that the real ticket here? It's not about ads, it's about turnout?
Absolutely. You know, we see that fundraising haul, and surely it indicates that there is a surge of support for Donald Trump, but probably amongst independents. We've seen it amongst, millionaires who say, you know what, I'm going to donate to Donald Trump, and that's wonderful. But if that money is not spent on the ground operations, specifically for get out the vote operations, then it means nothing. And unfortunately for Donald Trump, he is fighting off, 3 other lawfare cases right now, and he has to use some of this money for legal fees. There's no doubt about it. But what's concerning is that if the RNC and Team Trump do not put enough money into on-the-ground resources the way that Democrats have been doing, I mean, they have, a dozen offices in Pennsylvania alone working on get-out-the-vote efforts. If Republicans cannot do the same job Democrats are doing, they will lose. Donald Trump can be up in every single poll, but when it comes to Election Day, not everybody who is polled actually shows up to vote, whereas Democrats, they use their money to do get-out-the-vote efforts for mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, and they're getting those votes.
Yeah, the get-out-the-vote effort has always been huge on Election Day for Democrats, but in the last couple of cycles, we have seen Democrats do better work when it comes to early voting. Are you seeing, through your investigations, that the GOP is doing any more work on early voting?
So I wrote a story a few weeks ago, and I talked to people in swing states. I was talking to people in Arizona, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and a few others. And what the consensus I found was that at the time I wrote it, so the beginning of May, there were no on-the-ground operations from the RNC. All the work that we are seeing be done to turn out voters to register Republicans, that is on grassroots organizations. They're doing a phenomenal job, and they will absolutely be the backbone of this campaign. What's concerning to me, though, is Democrats are not relying just on grassroots. They're relying on the DNC, on Biden's campaign. Everyone is doing an all-in effort for the Democrats, whereas Republicans are not on that same page. Now, granted, I've heard that the RNC is starting to do their on-the-ground operations and turn them up, which is welcome news. And, yes, the election is in a few months. They do have time. But when you know that Democrats have been, expanding their operations for weeks, if not months, starting now just feels too late.
That's an interesting take, 151 and a half days away from the election, that, hey, if you're just getting into the boots on the ground, knocking on doors, end of campaigning, that you're too late. And a lot of us have election fatigue already. So I look at locally, since I live in North Delaware and I'm aware of what's going on in Pennsylvania, there's a guy named Scott Pressler. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He has done more to register voters for the GOP in Pennsylvania. He moved his life to Pennsylvania in an effort to flip the state, and he's made huge strides. In your reporting, does the GOP recognize a guy like this, and are they even putting any money behind his efforts?
I think the Republican Party definitely recognizes the asset that Scott Pressler is and the work he does, and I believe that they said they were going to work with him in some capacity. But Scott Pressler is one guy. They need to have that kind of appetite for success across the board, and they need to invest in grassroots organizations which have tons of volunteers and throwing money behind them. Whereas, for Democrats, for instance, not only do they have on-the-ground operations, which Republicans don't, but they also have the arm of the government. One thing that Biden did, which is just egregious, but it's working for Democrats, is Biden bucks. That's what we at the Federalist call it. And basically, it's taking taxpayer dollars to give it to universities, DHS, other federal agencies to turn out voters who just coincidentally happen to lean Democratic, i.e. young college students. Not only Republicans have to grapple with get out the vote efforts, mail-in ballot efforts, and what have you, Democrats still have another leg up in that they are able to target young voters via college because they're giving them money. Republicans can't do that when they're on the executive branch,
Yeah, you can't forgive college loans as a Republican, but Joe Biden, even though the Supreme Court told him no, seems to be funneling a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars that way, and he says he's still looking for new ways to do it. And then those other projects you mentioned, like infrastructure projects that will put jobs into those communities, which translates to money, which translates to, they think, votes. but you have to wonder if the inflation is still such a big deal, will that overwhelm what they believe is going to be the goodwill of those votes? I don't know. Are you seeing any specific push by the RNC to put money into any specific swing state? Is it Michigan? Is it Wisconsin? Is it Nevada? Is it Pennsylvania?
Mike, your guess is as good as mine. I have inquired with the RNC and Team Trump on multiple occasions, asking them for this information because we would love to know what's going on. You know, we have just as much of a pony in this race as anyone else does because we don't want to keep suffering under Biden's economy. And all I'm continually told is that when I ask how much money is being put in, they tell me, quote, enough. Well, what's enough? Because Democrats are doing enough. They're not shy about it. They're flouting. They're touting it. They're putting it out there. And Republicans are playing coy about it. And I don't necessarily know if that's the best method to go about it. If it is, more power to them. I hope so. But let me put it this way. We saw that New York Times Siena poll come out recently. And what did it show? It showed Donald Trump up among registered and likely voters. That is concerning because he's not up the same margin. There is a gap, right? There are more registered voters who support Donald Trump than likely voters. You know what that tells me? That tells me that the RNC has ground game to do. They can go out there and they can go to those registered voters who are unlikely to vote and say, hey, you like Donald Trump? They say, yeah. They say, are you registered? They say, yeah. And they say, okay, if you're not going to make it to the poll, let's get you an absentee ballot if you're eligible, right? They can do those things. That's how you close the margins. And there's no one on the ground to do it.
Yeah, that ground game is really important. And Donald Trump has said now for a couple of months the victory needs to be too big to rig. And he means that the GOP needs to get as close to the DNC when it comes to early voting as possible. We know the Democrats are trained to vote as early as possible. And the Republicans, like me, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I always look forward to going into my polling place on Election Day. But this year, I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to encourage everybody to get out as early as possible and to vote as soon as they can by mail. And then once things are changed and once there's a new resident at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and control of Congress is different, then I'll be an advocate for no more of this mad month-long early voting and back to one-day paper ballots. But we can't get there until we have control. The Democrats see it differently. I'm just wondering if I'm leaving anything out here, Brianna. It's a great piece on the Federalist from Brianna Lyman about where is the money going? All of this money that has been raised just since the verdict. But it won't matter. It won't mean a thing if it's not spent in the right places. It's great stuff. And as I said, your Twitter feed is also excellent, Brianna. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Mike.
And there she goes. Just good stuff. It is good common sense. We have so much money. Our elections are, I think we're going to be well into the $1 billion spent per candidate when we look at it. And if it's not spent in the right places, then it's just going to do nothing. It's like the old adage about fertilizer. If you spread it around appropriately, it will grow things magically. If it just sits in one big pile in the wrong spot, it's just going to stink. And that's not what we're looking for here. A couple other stories I want to get to and make sure we get to them. I talked about Kamala Harris because yesterday, and it seems like I was poking the gods, if you will. Yesterday, I was speculating as to where is Kamala Harris? We hadn't seen her in a while. And then, as if magic, as if I said her name 3 times, she showed up on Jimmy Kimmel's show last night, which I think Chris Plant said it today. The late night shows are no longer about what the late night shows of my childhood were about. When Johnny Carson was on, it was about the latest film, comedians, singers, and it was about fun. And now it's about politics. And it really seems that both Kimmel and Colbert, and thank God for Gutfeld and the crew over at Fox, because they're doing late night comedy. And of course, Chris's show on Newsmax. But Kamala Harris showed up on Jimmy Kimmel's show last night, And she was giving civics lessons, which is not something I think of when I think of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was teaching us how the government works. And, again, the late night shows used to be about fun, used to be about laughter, used to be about the latest movie that came out. But now, what do we get? Well, I got to give her proper introduction, don't I? Yes, Kamala Harris deserves her correct introduction.
The cackling nincompoop who is a heartbeat away from the presidency, the comprehensively incapable Kamala Harris.
The comprehensively incapable Kamala Harris. Last night on Kimmel.
Well, in our history, look at the Dred Scott decision. This is not the first time that we know the court can make decisions that violate the civil rights of the people. But this is when we have to praise the fact that we still have an intact democracy with three co-equal branches of government. So what the Supreme Court took away, Congress can put back in place. And that's where the people come in with your right to then elect the people in the United States Congress who will fight and protect your freedom.
So, of course, she's selling abortion because that's her number one mission, never mind the fact that she's the border czar. And the border's still a mess. But she's out there selling abortion. And to talk about the three co-equal branches of government and then to take what the Supreme Court has done, not just as it relates to abortion by giving the power back to the individual states as is constitutional, but to take the Supreme Court's decision on student loans and to completely give it the finger. It's just, well, it's rude and it's wrong. But there was more from Kamala Harris last night, the comprehensively incapable Kamala Harris, talking about jailing people for smoking marijuana. Now, this is another part of what the Biden administration and the Biden campaign are trying to do in trying to get marijuana decriminalized across the country, reclassified, no longer a Schedule I drug. That's what they're trying to do because they're trying to get the weed vote. So obvious.
Well, look, I think we both agree people shouldn't have to go to jail for smoking weed.
Why would you go to jail for smoking weed?
And we've pardoned a number of people. I think it's interesting also, because remember, there was a time when people would say, well, marijuana is a gateway drug. Yes. And these were failed policies, right? The resources should be better directed and will be better directed to deal with opioid addiction and what we need to do around fentanyl, getting more resources into mental health and mental health care, right?
So just curious, because I went back and looked at the stats on this. Between 2004 and 2010, when Kamala Harris was out in California and locking people up, her office got 1,956 misdemeanor and felony convictions for marijuana possession and cultivation for sale. So she was responsible for almost 2,000 people getting locked up, convicted for using marijuana. And she talks about fentanyl there. She talks about what this administration wants to do, to stop the scourge of fentanyl. The best way to stop the fentanyl deaths in this country, or at least to start diminishing them, would be to close the damn border, because the fentanyl's coming in through the border. That's the real truth. But she's out there on the talk show circuit now. Is it because they're going to make a move on Joe? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they believe she's a good spokesperson for the younger vote, which they're not getting. The Biden-Harris campaign is not getting the younger vote, and it has a lot to do with the economics, especially on home ownership. I'll explain just around the corner. It's just the best morning show in the country, without a doubt. It's Mike Opelka in for my friend Vince Coglianese, who's on the mend. Just got a great text from Katie Gorka. Hey, Mike, I'm now the chair of the Fairfax GOP, and we're hosting Scott Presler, who you just mentioned, for a Get Out the Vote training next Thursday. You can get details at the Fairfax GOP website. In case you want to mention it. I do, of course. I think Get Out the Vote is really going to be critical. Pressler is doing great work getting people registered in all parts of some very important states. So if you want to check that out, this is a great, simple education to get. And I have time. I can get one of these calls in here. Let's at least get one of these in here. Phil is in Fredericksburg. Hello, Phil. Welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, you mentioned Joe Biden and the student loan thing. When the Supreme Court said you cannot disperse those funds, that was the end of it. He has no legal authorization to disperse those funds. Joe Biden is actually stealing those hundreds of millions of dollars right in front of our face. He's dispersing it. He's stealing that money, and everybody who's helping him disperse that money in the federal government is committing accessory to felonious theft. So, I mean, they need to get that guy, and they need to arrest him for this.
This is interesting because they've found some legal language to allow them to get away with the, and I'm using air quotes, forgiveness. I've got news on court cases and Donald Trump just around the corner. Opelka in for Coglianese on WMAL.